Mr. Zack Swafford, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Cristian. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited about this chat because I wasn't expecting our last conversation. I've always really enjoyed our conversations, but I feel like in particular, our last conversation covered everything from the very tactical step-by-step thinking around how to run a business to basically the meaning of human life at the end of time. And so I'm really excited to pick up one of the threads that we left off on, which is what you're doing now, which is a perfect segue for my first question. Mr. Zack, what do you do?
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really excited to talk about that and everything else you mentioned. So Zack Swafford, I did AI at Stanford, and then went on to found Dart a couple of years ago. Dart is project management powered by AI. So we use LLMs and more traditional AI to basically smooth over a lot of the rough edges of project management. Things like writing up docs and doing the same mundane work over and over. We hear from a lot of PMs that there's just a lot of like repetitive work. And so Dart automates out a lot of that busy work. We're also building a future with Dart where humans and AI can be more and more kind of interconnected. And I don't want to say interchangeable, but delegatable, ways that you can interact directly with a human and maybe delegate some of your work to someone else on your team and then seamlessly kind of collaborate with AI as well. And we do some of that now with more coming soon.
And there's another thing about this that I'm particularly excited about, and you're one of the few people in the world who has access to the draft of my sci-fi book, and yes. So you can see why I'm interested in something like the concept of agency, and the fact that you're going to be delegating responsibilities, and there's layers of meaning in that concept, and so I have had conversations about AI, but not necessarily around the concept of this thing and the exciting vision of the future that Dart is building, which is like this agentic AI type of future, which I'm very excited to get to. So let's talk. And another thing is that another area of deep interest of mine is productivity and productivity tools and whatever gets you leverage on your mind, bicycle for the mind kind of stuff. Yeah. Why don't we talk about, like the product as it is now and how, like some key differentiators from other platforms that may exist out there. And then we can slowly build to get to the crazier vision of the future.
The further future. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So right now, Dart is great at doing a lot of the things that you might like or you might already know about from your LLM tools, but doing them in a more seamless and integrated way with a project management experience. So right now we're replacing tools like Asana or Monday.com or some of these older incumbents that have done a great job for a long time with traditional project management. But now Dart can come in and do a lot of those same things, but then also streamline a bunch of the busy work out. So picture one really popular thing that we do is helping you to brainstorm. So if you're starting a project, a lot of times, I'm sure you're familiar with that writer's block, but of course we also have talked with PMs who don't know how to get started on a project, for example. Dart can either help you fill out your project based on old projects that you've done and kind of pull in those patterns and stuff, learn those patterns, or we can just help you brainstorm from whole cloth too. So you can collaboratively like bounce ideas around with an LLM. And that's and you can do it all kind of within a tool. So I'm a big believer in general in what I call verticalized AI. I think other people call it that too, but basically tools like ChatGPT or GPT-4 or other LLMs are kind of the horizontal components of AI. And then those are really important, really powerful, but the really amazing UX unlocks come from when you can actually put those together with a tool. an example I always return to is that nobody wants to work with a spreadsheet. Nobody wants to like chat with a spreadsheet or like build their spreadsheet and their formulas by doing chat. If you know how to use a spreadsheet, you're not going to want to like use ChatGPT to like use your spreadsheet. But LLMs in general can help you a lot with different spreadsheeting needs, like figuring out like that one formula you always forget or whatever. And so this is a great analogy for Dart, right? These experts who have spent a lot of time with project management, they don't want to suddenly do everything in ChatGPT. They want a tool that natively works really well with LLMs, and that's what Dart does right now.
And I think it's really cool. I mean, we haven't really even touched the subject matter that much, but I think that you're touching on a very important point. That is that these chat-based use cases or these chat UIs are great at demonstrating sort of the conversational ability of the thing, but they're not very good for any kind of work like a human, like another human, where you're sort of whiteboarding ideas and you're sort of like putting stuff down, taking stuff away. Very hard for them to maintain the context, and also for you to maintain the context, because you're going to have to copy an output to another app and then make sure that whatever mental note you made of like, oh, this is pretty good, but the third paragraph needs some work. You lose a lot of sort of focus by having to switch from one thing to another. So I think that's a really important point. But I think it's also really interesting that the first use case that you mentioned is this creative sandbox type of thing, which is not at all what I was expecting. I thought it was going to be something like, automated task completion or something of the sort.
Yeah.
Well,
the truth about that is that we do a lot of different things too. There's a lot of really cool ways that you can apply these tools, and different people like different applications. So I was also debating which feature I was going to highlight, when I mentioned that, but brainstorming is one that a lot of people have been telling us has been working really well for them recently. So that's why I mentioned it.
And I think it's a bigger theme among the episodes of the show, but that's sort of a very, I think that's one of the most likely to emerge best use cases for LLMs is a co-brainstorm brainstorming partner. Okay, there's another question there that is the subject matter and project management in general. It's a crowded space. There's a lot of historical incumbents with many iterations of product. What made you land on that space?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. The short answer is that I believe that AI is a big paradigm shift. I don't know if that's a super unconventional opinion, particularly on this podcast, but I believe that many of the tools that we know and love of the past couple of years, but even of now, will be replaced by new tools that are AI native, for lack of a better term. You can look back at even the history of project management and say, okay, the tools that came before Jira, and there were many, project management was still a discipline before then. Those are relegated to the scrap heap of history by Jira being the first one to go cloud native, essentially. Jira was the same as all the other ones that came before, but they built it on the cloud, and it was very successful because of that. And same with Salesforce, right? There were other CRMs before Salesforce, but they were just legacy software. No one's heard of them anymore. So if we can I don't even think it's a big leap to think that AI is as important or more important than SaaS or mobile or some of these other paradigm shifts that have upended industries. I actually think that now is a great time for any industry to be revolutionized by a new verticalized AI application that can take the good parts of the old world and marry them in an AI native way to the new world. Now, Asana, Notion, a bunch of these other incumbents are, of course, launching AI features in their tools as well to try to keep up with that paradigm shift. sure that will work to varying degrees for some of them, but the pre-Jira competitor, the pre-Salesforce competitor, also tried to jump on the SaaS train and failed. And so I believe that there's in many industries, but certainly project management, maybe foremost amongst them, there is the ability to kind of replace because incumbents won't be able to keep up, won't be able to change as fast, and there's even a perceptual element there where people don't perceive them as the future, as future-facing. Dart can both, in practice and in appearance, be the AI project management tool, even if Asana also has some really awesome AI project management features.
I think that's really great. And, I have a hard time not geeking about the productivity as a space, like I think there's an art to it. There's a performance aspect to it too, that I think is really interesting. You're not the same person you are normally when you're when you're running a meeting, for instance, right? Or you're not the same person you normally are when you're doing a performance review. It's a very different kind of, it's like this very interesting subset of human endeavor that I think is way more difficult than I think people give it, any stock. I'm interested in a couple of things. One is, Salesforce targeted the salesperson or the sales manager. What else? QuickBooks maybe is a good one. Targeted the accountant. Does Dart target the product manager? You mentioned PM a couple of times. That's why I bring it up.
Absolutely. I think more than those other tools, as you may have kind of been alluding to, productivity is something that everybody can get behind, not just the one role at the big enterprise. So I would say more than those other examples, Dart is meant to appeal to many layers of a business, all the way from the IC through to engineering managers or other managers and PMs up to leadership. If we had one role that we were selling to, it would be a PM for sure, because Dart probably provides them with the most value. We're also really popular with teams that don't have a PM but should. So selling to those kinds of leaders who have yet to be able to get product help has also been very successful for us. I think one of the biggest places that Dart is playing is in augmenting your product abilities as a team. So a lot of times that means helping out and giving a PM higher leverage, or of helping to bridge the gap when you don't have a PM yet.
But it's a side note, but I think it's also interesting to highlight the role of a product manager, because you go through different phases of relationships with product managers, and depending on the corporate setting and depending on the role, depending on the team, the role of the product manager can be very different. It can be more creating marketing copy. It could be more, a project manager, essentially making sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. It could be literally translating for an engineer who has no ability to communicate in the business language, right? It's a tricky role, often ungrateful, very high prestige, but there's an interesting thing there too that lands squarely in the realm of LLMs, that they're also very good at being these translators between, code and technical complexity to explain this to me like I'm 5, right? So I think that's really interesting to have that persona be your, LLM native AI productivity suite. And it makes sense now to me that it's just precisely this kind of conversation that you want to have. You want to have a conversation with someone who gets both sides. And oftentimes humans, because of the experience that we have, tend to sort of like speak one language. Like if we're in technical mode and we're talking about code all the time and it's all like frameworks or acronyms, it's hard to break out of sometimes that pattern. Same time, if you're only writing business stuff or marketing copy, then you sort of like you erode a little bit the nuances of the technical complexity that go on. I'm very curious to hear sort of like what the primitives are for the product, like in terms of spaces or projects or tickets or what is the lingo for Dart and how have those sort of been imagined in an AI first context?
Yeah. Wow. Lots of great questions there. Lots of great ideas. Responding first to the first half of what you're saying, I completely agree. And that's one of the ways that I personally have really enjoyed working with more AI in my life is the ability to bring new perspectives. I can't always, we're a small team, small but mighty, but we don't have a CMO or someone like that yet at the table. And if we, not that ChatGPT can stand in a true way for a CMO or for any other role, but it's way better to have a conversation with bring that kind of a perspective to the table rather than not having it at all. So it's a poor replacement, but better than nothing. For a lot of bringing those roles to the table. And also, even if I had a CMO, I couldn't be talking to them 10 times a day about everything that crossed my mind, right? So bouncing ideas around in that kind of way is one of my favorite tools. Primitives for Dart, though. So we have built out a lot of Dart in a way that makes it mostly familiar to human users on the front end. So we do have basically spaces, and then within a space can represent a project or a team. Within a space, we then have documents and tasks. Those can essentially be organized into folders and lists. That is kind of the bread and butter of organization. We don't have too many layers, but just enough that teams of up to a few hundred have been perfectly fine organizing their work within spaces and then within those subcategories. The core primitives then end up being basically tasks and docs. Unlike Notion, we do have separate concepts there. Most tools do, I suppose. Notion, one of the revolutionary things about Notion was combining those two concepts, but we think that like action and documentation are sort of different fundamental like primitives, essentially. So, and I think our data model bears that out a little bit in the sense that they're pretty different data types as well. The cool thing about that then is that AI can kind of interact directly with those primitives. And really, I think a lot of the magic happens in plumbing LLMs primarily, but also traditional machine learning into those existing like human facing primitives. So we will have, let's say you make a task to write a changelog blog post about what we've been up to recently, right? Dart directly has access to all the tasks that you and your team have accomplished over the past week or however long it's been since you wrote your last changelog. And then Dart can pull in those tasks, give that as context to an LLM along with the bigger context of your team, your space, your project, and then get out a document. So most of the way that we interact with AI right now is through tasks and docs, and a task can get accomplished by AI or can get created by AI, and then docs can be written or augmented by AI as well. A PRD is another perfect example of that. If you wanted to build a spec for a project, you can ask Dart to help out with that. It's going to bring you back a doc, maybe link in some tasks in there as you might with a real PRD. Here are the big epics, the big projects, the big steps. and here are the tasks to get that stuff done. Dart can brainstorm that, break that down for you, give you back a document and some tasks, for example. The very last thing I should mention as well is comments. And this is something that we're still working on improving, but right now you can also chat with Dart AI and with other agents as we start to bring them online. And Dart AI basically right now is sort of our all-encompassing agent that does all sorts of good PM stuff, but we're in the early stages now of integrating other agents in to Dart as well, so that maybe you can assign a task to Devin, is the famous coding agent that may be overhyped right now, but will not be in a year or two. It's certainly my prediction. And you can imagine assigning one of your tasks to Devin, and then Dart will translate that into something that Devin as an agent can understand. You get your nice human-facing PM tool. People are used to interacting with a good PM tool. That's like the standard way to interact with tasks and assignment and stuff. You assign it to an AI agent. AI agent takes Dart, translates that, takes that, gives it to an agent, and then you can chat back and forth in the comments. A lot of times people don't love commenting in PM tools. Slack is maybe a more natural way. We're still working on how to make that communication between a human and an agent as seamless as possible in Dart. But in a perfect world, the comments would also be like an actually surprisingly important primitive of communication between humans, of course, as it is now, and then humans and AI.
And I think that there's a hidden hard problem there too, and especially in the comments part, where if you have a doc and you want to change sentence 4 of paragraph 3, and you highlight that sentence, you're like, I don't know how I feel about the language. Usually in a real world human to human setting, that sparks off a conversation about, what about this? What about this? Somebody else chimes in, and then eventually some consensus is kind of amorphously arrived at, and the owner of the document will sort of incorporate that feedback, right?
Right.
This is historically one of the things that has been challenging for AI, is to do sort of this in context editing and sort of but I don't think it's because of the LLMs themselves. I don't think anything in the architecture stops that in any way. I think it's more about, okay, how do you translate this visual thing that, we have the sort of a document. We have a sense for what it means, and we're both looking at the same document. But the AI, you need to sort of simulate that a little bit, where you're like, this is the thing, this is the meta thing, and these are the attributes of the meta thing, and all kinds of nuances you want to represent there. How have you been thinking about solving that? Have you been thinking about it as a formatting thing, or have you been thinking about something else completely entirely?
Ooh, yeah, great question. It's very interesting. Yeah, I think that there are a few different approaches here, and we have tried some of them and are still in the early stages. I think, AI in general, LLMs in general are still obviously in their early stages. So I'm sure that there will be better solutions for these sorts of things going forward. I think there's a few pretty good options. One thing that we still have pretty good success with is, well, okay, let me lay out the 3 options that I'm thinking of right here to kind of solve your problem, and then I'll talk through some of the pros and cons of each if we have time. So the 3 options that we have tried that I can see at least are, for one edit, one suggested comment, AI could rewrite the entire document, which is obviously a bit of overkill, but also has some pros from the perspective of just how LLMs work best. It could respond to the comment thread with, let's say, the AI never makes true edits, but instead, just once something is there, it kind of can help continue on in a linear way, just basically like a conversation about something. This one has the obvious con of the AI not having as much power to like actually replace text, really. But people like control, and one thing that we struggle with sometimes at Dart is that we believe that a lot of Dart AI is like just as good as what a human would do, if not better, but it's not perfect. And people sometimes will look at something and say like, oh, those subtasks that you generated, they're not exactly what I was thinking. And like, of course, they're not what you were thinking. Like, A, they might be better. B, if someone else went to do that, that might be, they definitely wouldn't write like word for word, like 20 words that are exactly what you had in mind. But people expect that AI will either be perfect or that they can control it a bit more, or they have approval rights and that kind of thing. So I don't know if that is the right paradigm for the long run for AI, but it is one that actually, for better or worse, I think users sometimes prefer, is a gentler approach that just suggests things here and there, and that can be done very linearly because the AI just has, like LLM just has to generate more text. It's like, here's a comment thread, here's the context of the document. What are your thoughts now? That's just like perfect LLM fodder, essentially. No complexity, no formatting, nothing needed. It just like write a few more words. The third obvious option is more like an actions approach, right? And this is one that is pretty, it's getting more and more popular. It's how ChatGPT can store memories and can call function calling, essentially can call functions in other applications, or can make charts or search the web or that kind of thing. And this isn't like too crazy. It definitely it works. Basically the LLM has to, along with just the text that returns, it also has to tell you what action it wants to take here. And that's something that we've had moderate success with as well. I think that's probably the best of both worlds in the long run. So you can just imagine LLM returns one of three actions to a comment thread. It's either, resolve and no more text, comment in thread and add that comment, or edit existing text, and then you have to return a few parameters, or basically just like describe how the text needs to be edited. And yeah, that function calling approach is not, it's definitely it's the direction that things are trending, I would say. So I think it's doable.
And that's funny. And you missed the final one, which is like push back. At the end of the day, at some point they will have thought about that phrase way more than we have. And
yes. Yes. I guess that might be encapsulated by like a resolve or a comment that says like, "Oh, you're
acknowledge."
wrong. Yeah. Acknowledge, exactly.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess the middle option seems to be a simple way out, where it can, you can talk to it for a bit and then arrive at a reasonable standpoint, and then you say accept changes, something like that. I think should be. I'm trying not to get ahead of myself too much, but you did bring it up, and you mentioned the sort of the agentic paradigm of these AI models, which is it's still not solidified by any means, but it's this idea of an LLM being able to, essentially, us being able to structure the output of these LLMs sufficiently well that those outputs can be used to integrate with like normal computer science and software engineering services. And the results of those get fed back to the LLM. And it's almost like a delegated responsibility or agency type of paradigm. And this was OpenAI was very big on developing the model, and a lot of open source initiatives also are very keen on it. And it does seem to be the way that these models seem to be trending. Is like they're going to be able to tactically perform these actions that we allow them to do for us. All right, I kind of want to give you a blank slate and and say, okay, how do you feel about that model as the emergent model, for one?
Yes. All right. Well, that's That's a very interesting question. That's actually what I was thinking about too. I might have just gone there as well. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think, well, it depends how far out we want to zoom out here. I think on a very practical level, I think it's an awesome path forward for the industry right now, because it allows more specialization and diversification, and it allows more competition. And I think it's going to lead to much better services than if we were just relying on the centralized, huge foundational models. If those were the only answer to every request. Well, I mean, of course, at the end of the day, if they were giving the best answer, then probably that's just the way to go in practice. I don't think that's how things are going to be, particularly just from my experience with Dart. I mean, we are able to do a lot better than just chatting with ChatGPT, not because we have trained a better foundational model or anything, obviously, but because we have mastered the specific prompts that do the best stuff. We have done some fine tuning, but probably most importantly, we have figured out how to encapsulate and provide the layers of context to a given foundational model about, okay, what is actually relevant for this given request. And at least for a very long time, we're not going to have like infinite context windows or foundational models that like know literally everything ever. So giving a foundational model like the right context and the right approach to do something, and the right framework to guide an approach is something that I think, I mean, it sounds kind of basic. It sounds like you're just writing some text and some rules about like how to provide things with context. But at the end of the day, I think that we might have 10 years of innovation on that, making better and better agents with competitive, where each one can do different types of coding. And you've got your front end engineer and your back end engineer, and you've got your engineer who's really good. And all these engineers are agents, obviously. You've got your engineer who's really good at a specific language, and one that like really understands refactoring to avoid dependency cycles. And like, why not like have all of these like different kinds of agents that have different specialties built on top of the foundational models? So I think there's a lot of benefits, and I also think it's just the right approach. More generally, I guess I would say also in the scheme of like, yeah, and this is very maybe meta or kind of laws of the universe type thing, but like I think competition is good, and I think that competition between AI agents, both on a human level, the companies making these AI agents, I think that helps us make better ones. But also in terms of the agents themselves, I think that having a purpose of trying to do a better and better job helps drive to an outcome where like we do better and better jobs, and we solve better and hard problems and do better and better work.
There's a point I think that is incredibly important that you mentioned, that you hear people who aren't as informed or aren't in the weeds actually using these models say things like, oh, there might be a ceiling, there might be an intelligence ceiling with these AI models. They're not that smart. It's all a fad. Like it's another crypto thing. Why? But the point that you made about like we have 10 years of research in just the linguistics we use to guide these things. And there's two layers there. Some of the most interesting research is, have you heard about WorldSim or WebSim or USIM or those kinds of projects?
Vaguely. Well, I'd love to hear it from you.
So basically what they do is prompt engineering to get to build interactive experiences with LLM. And so it's essentially it's a seed prompt. You as the user don't see that prompt, but you get sort of like an experience out of it. You're sort of trying to figure out what's going on. And the kinds of stuff that they use to get the AI to behave in completely unexpected ways and sometimes break character. It's, like I am an AI persona. I can't assist you with that kind of defaults. is absolutely fascinating. I can't imagine you will read something more interesting than the World Sim prompt. And I'll link it in the episode notes, because honestly, everybody should read it because it's so crazy. So there's the linguistics of it, which is like, all right, what language do we use to get this guy or this thing to spit out stuff that sounds like what I want to hear? And back to the idea of like these project management dependencies don't sound like I would say that, right? There's another added layer, which I think is like even more prescient for your space. That is, you're trying to do some of this stuff computational. It's not just the language that you use. It's like you're pulling from dynamic data sources. You're using that team's documents and that team's tasks. And everybody has a slightly different flavor of how they use these documents. Maybe some of them, haven't migrated completely to Dart and have a lot of their docs in Google Drive or whatever. And so there's like imperfect information. There's a lot of stuff there too. So between the two, there's so much room for exploration and literally trial and error for, like, gosh, years to come. I mean, this is we haven't even begun to explore how these things connect together. There's another thing there too, which I think is really interesting. That is the fact that you don't need the AI models to reinvent the wheel. You don't need them to perform the actual calculation of 2 + 2 = 4. They could just use a calculator program. Sure. And I forget, there was one final thing, but I think it's just like I'm too tempted to go into the meta thing about sort of like the bigger AI question. And so the way we've been having this conversation, I think there's an unspoken assumption between both of us around this research project that humanity is undertaking called AI. And I think, and I think you agree, that we're in a pretty unique point in time where this is within reach, inflection point, and stuff is starting to get extremely weird. I'd love to hear more about, and sort of like whenever we've chatted, we've always, I know that you feel that way, and I think you know that I feel this way, but we never talked about how we got there. So I would love to hear about what your journey to sort of understand these things around AI, how that's evolved over time from the classes we took at Stanford, which are very different, to the world that we live in today and the types of work that you have to do today.
Yeah. Wow. Great question. Well, I think that part of the journey for me, and I know part of the journey for a lot of other founders or entrepreneurs or, deep thinkers and what have you. I mean, I think a lot of people are attracted to the hardest problems in the world and the most exciting areas, the areas where the most research is happening, the most is changing. I think in the middle of the 20th century, a lot of that was around fundamental science and physics and those sorts of things. And I think that there's a really strong analogy to there. All of the best and brightest minds, collaborated on particle physics throughout the first half of the 20th century. And now it's really attracting. Now AI is probably even more important, from my opinion. But I guess, of course, I would say that because I'm now rather than then. I'm living now. But I think that a lot of people are, myself included, are just attracted to an industry where you can make a huge impact and where everything's changing and you can help shape the world and help a lot of people build really cool stuff that really changes things and really improves people's lives, productivity in my case, and project management and kind of just the way that we get stuff done in the world, thinking more broadly. So that's kind of where what attracts me to this now. And I think that's also just been what's attracted me to this for a long time. I mean, I was attracted to Stanford and Silicon Valley because it felt like that's where the coolest stuff was happening 15 years ago, 10 years ago with Facebook and stuff, right? And I'm very glad that I live now rather than 10 years ago, because I would be, I think, much less motivated by working on social media. But that's, I think at the time, right, that's how I was kind of attracted into tech in general, kind of the same guiding principles essentially. But yeah, in school, AI seemed like the big data seemed like the really hot stuff that really I knew was going to have an impact on the world and change things. And yeah, I've always been kind of a neophyte, technophile. I don't know, whatever silly Latinization that makes sense there. I've always kind of wanted to work with the latest and greatest and move stuff forward. And I love new tech, new things, exploring new stuff. So I don't know. I think that might have been a broader answer than you were looking for, or like a more zoomed out one. But that's my big picture answer.
Yeah, and I think that's a super honest answer. I mean, like it's. I think if I were to think about what attracts me to this idea, what attracted me to sort of study it as an undergrad, it's very similar stuff. I mean, like it's not just the difficulty of it, but the fact that there's the promise of a much better world behind it. You know, like if we do everything right, you know, like there's an empowerment idea there that I think is incredibly exciting. The types of classes that we took were around like big data or around sort of like more linear algebra-y type of stuff that would help you build the foundation model is I think not necessarily in the empowering. That stuff is complex and difficult, and you need a lot of reading and reps to sort of even begin to find your footing there. But the kinds of stuff that you can do with LLMs, where you're sort of learning how to talk to a thing, is incredibly cool. And I think that there's sort of like the thing that you alluded to, that is, it's not just going to be stuff that we know that is going to be changed. It's going to be the creation of stuff we can't know yet, right? Like there's new kinds of stuff is going to happen. Like the world sim, web sim, all that stuff is I think in that category already.
Emergent properties kind of always come out. It's sorry to interrupt you, but I guess I sometimes think about this of how in YC there's this phrase about SISP, which is a solution in search of a problem, and that's a bad thing to be. You want to start with a problem and then solve it, rather than starting with a solution and then hoping that you can find a problem for it. But you have to, on the other hand, balance that with a lot of the coolest stuff, the coolest tech, started off as just a passion project or as pure research. And, even there's obviously the famous Henry Ford, potentially misattributed quote about people wanting faster horses rather than cars. There's that, but then there's also the fact that OpenAI, for just a much more relevant example, OpenAI just was like working on research for 10 years before they had like the best product ever, the fastest growing consumer product of all time. So yeah, we've got to simultaneously balance these notions of like building things that people actually want like now and solving real problems if you want to create a business, versus like just playing with cool stuff and seeing what happens, and like hoping that cool businesses emerge.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting, almost like artisanal or artistic component to the second thing. Not even if you don't do entertainment stuff with it, even if you don't use it for a creative, sort of purely creative purpose, like you're in the business of essentially you're playing an instrument. Basically, you're finding the prompts that get this thing to sing the way you want, right? And I think it's really so in that process. If if you play music or if you're learning to play the keyboard, you're gonna make mistakes and stuff is gonna be different. And things, but wait a minute, this is actually kind of cool, and it leads to this, I think, new exciting possibility about new opportunities that we hadn't even assumed were possible before, because your brain can't compute the fact that there's a program that you call and you basically have access to all of human knowledge, and it will respond to you like a human, and in time it'll be personalized, in time it'll know exactly what your context is immediately, so you don't even have to say what is a computer. You have to say what's that thing and it'll know.
Right.
So
if they ever launch GPT 4.0 on the app with those demos, I think that's not that far away, right? You just point it at the thing and it tells you, it knows what you're looking at.
Yeah, and then oh man, and then I'm also very interested in the dynamics of the race. You know, like the PR fights between OpenAI and Google and Anthropic, and it's really interesting. And the sort of like the behind the scenes lobbying and trillions of dollars that are getting allocated to this stuff. It's so freaking fascinating. But I had a question for you, like a super tactical question. Something that happened to me is these models, especially if you're using something like GPT, the GPT API, and you're using the model that is like the GPT 4.0 latest, whatever it is, those change over time. And the output of prompts is different given the model.
Yep.
So this is a very tactical sort of like software engineer to software engineer question. How do you mitigate for that in your production environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, and I will say I'm in a bunch of channels with OpenAI employees and on the forums and stuff too, and definitely one of the most common things that people are bugging, if not the most common thing that people are bugging them about is this exact thing. Like, hey, it seems like the model is giving different output than it was yesterday. It seems like there's this new pattern of behavior, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, I think I have at least two answers. Very tactically, I think that you can pin a version, and they've gotten better at not messing up the versions that they pin, that actually just keeping them the way that they were. And I, at least in the past year or two, have not noticed huge variations in the outputs of our prompts going to a pin version. And that's why they do that. To be honest, I know a lot of times people don't, there are good reasons to not pin dependencies too, just in your package.json or in your requirements.txt or whatever. I'm a big fan of pinning dependencies in general. So I always do that. We have exact versions that are pinned for all of our dependencies and stuff. And we live with the slight consequences to that. But from a bigger picture, I mean, I think people are just going to have to start to get used to it. I mean, we just have to think of these things as more like humans and less like tools. And I don't mean as exactly like humans. I think that comes with a whole bag of worms. But just on that spectrum, a can of worms, I should say, on that spectrum of perfectly reliable computer program that you always does the exact same thing. Whenever you put something in, you get the exact same thing out, to humans, which are stateful and have moods and grow and learn and change and improve or deprove over time. We just have to shift our mental model and not expect LLMs to do the same thing over and over. And then the last answer is also just, it's somewhere in between the two. Well, again, a little bit more tactical. Develop test suites, right? Like get a set of 100 prompts, 100 test examples, and run them through your prompt. And that's also how you're going to want to iterate on your prompts as well. So it's good to have either way, right? Even if the underlying model weren't changing, you'd probably want to be improving your prompts, improving your context, that kind of thing. And yeah, you got to have numbers for that. So just run the numbers and stuff. And the funny thing is I would do that with humans too if I could. If I could test a human with 100 questions to see how good their acuity was on a given test, and then be like, yeah, you're still good to go write our code or something. I would do that too, I guess. Putting numbers behind performance like that is just a nice thing to be able to do. And it's cool that you can do that for LLMs. So yeah, get a framework, choose a framework that can evaluate prompts and evaluate models, and just put them together and run your tests every time there's a new one.
That is, yeah, I think at the end of the day, it seems to be just, have a robust testing suite. That'll help you catch the other thing. Yeah, man, hate it when it's that obvious. There's there's the other half of that, which is before you deploy. How do you what frame? There aren't good tools for prompt engineering. Like I have not found a sufficiently robust tool that helps you explore this creative space, because it really is it's an exponential space of like all the things that you can do to the prompt to change the parameters and the stochasticity, where sometimes they'll do what you want, but not every time. Um, how have you thought about sort of the research problem, which is I think is what it is, of prompt engineering as you're building out this sort of team? With like, and I know you're somebody hyper focused on efficiency. How do you avoid it from turning into this undocumented, unrecorded mess that it can lead to?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, and there's yeah, being very focused on efficiency and stuff kind of cuts both ways with that, because we all know that in the short term, you shouldn't, if you're only focused on efficiency in the short term, you shouldn't do any testing or any documentation, because you can go faster that way. And then if you're focused in the long term, then obviously you should do lots. So at a startup, of course, I think the calculation is pretty tough. We don't want to spend a huge amount of time documenting and testing stuff if it's all going to change in a couple weeks anyway. So, yeah, I mean, but that's kind of a tangent, I guess. The For better or worse, a lot of our team is engineers. A lot of our team really likes building stuff. We have mostly spun our own frameworks for prompt evaluation. It's also very helpful because it can kind of live natively, if that makes sense. So the scenarios where we want to test Dart, we have real tasks and we have a bunch of real scenarios where we can run through and see, okay, how is it really going to perform on this stuff? That's not very scalable, but I would liken it to manual QA. We can run kind of manual QA on these prompts if we make upgrades or changes and stuff, make sure things still behave the same way. And we have just a bunch of like cool scenarios in Dart with like, oh, this team is set up in this way with these kinds of tasks, and like, let's make sure that then this task, like these generated tasks, like make sense with everything else. And as you update your prompts, or update your models, or update the context that you're providing to the prompt, you can make sure everything still performs well. And then we also just have a homegrown like prompt evaluation like tool that where we do have a CSV full of scenarios, and it gives us a number for a new prompt. And if you make some tweaks to the prompt, add a few words here and there that give you a higher number on that metric, then you ship it.
Yep. No, I see, and because I think this is a non-trivial issue. The fact that you have all these companies that are building stuff on top of LLMs, and there's the unreliability component too, and it really scales very quadratically. You know, like it's not something that whenever you're trying to use these LLMs and you use it in 3 or 4 different places, you know, that all of a sudden you have 4 degrees of freedom. But if you're building a serious sort of a serious enterprise, you know, these can get really complicated really quick. And you want to iterate on that particular node. You want to iterate on the local vicinity, like these networks, you know, like output what I want. And then you want to do like a holistic thing. So I think I'm very curious to hear from you about it, because you're in the field using these tools and sort of like betting the company on these models and how the industry is going to evolve. And I 100% believe that the industry is going to get there. But it's a whole different thing altogether. Somebody who has an idea about how to use something with AI, and then you run into this stuff, and they're not exactly the same kind of software engineering problems that more seasoned veterans may know. You know, like
Right.
they're not the same kind of like end-to-end integration testing as.
Yeah, it's much more, I mean, again, on that spectrum of like tool that always does the same thing to human that evolves and changes and does different things in different scenarios, or even the same scenario. They're a lot more like the latter. And the skills to manage them might well be closer to people management skills than to traditional software engineering skills, which are not obviously directly inversely correlated, but sometimes different people land at different parts of that two-dimensional axis. Let me just say that. Yeah, it's a challenge. And I mean, I also believe this is a longer term thing. This may take a generation or two, but I also believe that people will grow up, or grow up or just learn to expect better, cooler stuff from their software, but less reproducible stuff. More like you would with a human, more like you would in a conversation with a human. If I'm interacting with you, I'm not expecting you to behave exactly the same way every time, or like those just aren't my learned expectations about how interactions with humans work. I believe that future software users will not have as much of an expectation that their software does the exact same thing every time. And that will free up developers at least a little bit. I mean, you're still going to be metrics driven and stuff, obviously, but it will free you up from this kind of almost artificial constraint of I need this to work perfectly every time the exact same way. That really constrains the power in some ways of humans and of LLMs.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that there's the nature. I think there's going to be a capability thing that's going to be crazy with AI, but I think there's going to be a just as important UI or HCI change too. And I think that but also cybersecurity landscape where these, like if you're trying to hack into a database by, going through the HTML and finding vulnerabilities, I think the same thing is going to happen with linguistics, and so interesting to read about how some people are trying to jailbreak the AIs using sort of esoteric languages or like Lojban or things like that. It's so crazy, the world that we're in. So I hear you on that, and I think that's actually kind of nice to know that that's happening. But I think that you're right that it'll take a while. I wanted to talk about Dart as a platform because sort of you're building these data primitives that AI models can, not just AI models, but AI agents, like longer running processes, can sort of like interact with, edit, modify, deal with. What was the decision around making it a platform as opposed to vertically say, Dart AI does everything?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about a little bit earlier with respect to competition. I don't believe that we at Dart, as capable and awesome as our team is, I don't believe that we can make the best engineering agent and the best design agent and the best marketing agent, and so on and so on. I think we already have actually the best project management agent or product management agent on the market. But I just don't think that we will be able to build and in particular like maintain forever the best version of all of those things. That would honestly be kind of crazy to imagine, I think, in a world where agents are everywhere and lots of companies are working on building different boutique ones. So yeah, I view the explosion of agents almost in the same way that there are a proliferation of like humans or like software tools in the world. So I don't think that Dart would be able. We basically reached the conclusion that Dart wouldn't be able to have a monopoly on all the best agents, and therefore to deliver the best user experience to someone who wanted to build a team of some agents and some humans to get stuff done, which I think is going to be what everyone's going to be doing, over the next 5 years. I mean, you don't want to hire like crappy Dart agents. You want to hire the best and brightest from the best companies. So more like Zapier, right? Zapier doesn't have thousands of duplicate apps in its platform. The power of Zapier is in connecting people. Yeah.
That's really cool. Do you also have this sort of highly automation friendly idea approach where it's like webhooks all over that kind of stuff?
We do have a fully capable API and webhooks and everything. The I think the AI, like how agents interact with the world, and in particular how they interact with their handlers, so to speak, either human or Dart or whatever, is something that we still need to work on a standardized interface for, right? It would be amazing to have like a standardized plug in where any agent can plug into Figma on one side, standard API on the other. Dart hooks into this side, obviously, but other PM tools or people or interfaces or whatever can hook in over here too. And then the agent does all the cool work in the middle. Yeah, that would be how I would imagine that. As far as automation friendliness, we do have lots of coding, like I said, fully open API. Lots of people have built on top of that. We have some examples and some what will help people build some cool automations and stuff through code. We also do have some in-app automations where you can build little workflows and stuff on your own. That's going to expand a ton over the next year in order to support this agent-based model. I mean, in order to plug in different building workflows is a lot of what PMs do, or it's a lot of what a project manager might do. It's a big part of that job. And so the ability for Dart to, and for humans running Dart to build those workflows in Dart is definitely something we need to focus
on. Yeah, I think that's the only way to go. I think that like I feel very sad when I hear about a new company that's approaching something like that and they're not doing an API first thing and they're not thinking sort of like just how crowded the space is and you want to get into Zapier, you want to be on Zapier as fast as possible, that kind of stuff. And then there's another topic, which is I think another area we could geek out on, which is okay, but you did decide to build one agent that you are excited about and confident on, and you sort of have an idea, and it's aligned and modeled after your own brain to some degree, which is the project manager AI. So I remember there was a moment last conversation that we had that stood out to me when I talked about, oh yeah, no, I did look into it. And it's like, well, for a given project, you want to find the subtasks and then recurse and then find the subtasks for those and then find the subtasks for those and then make sure that everything bubbles up and you got really excited about that. And you said like, now you're speaking my language. So I wanted to hear a bit more because that was basically the extent that we covered last time around what goes into building a project management agent and what have you found along the way?
Yeah, great question. So, well, I guess firstly, I suppose I would say we've been building Dart AI ideally to represent the best practices of a project manager, not necessarily my own brain or anyone else's on the teams. We've been building Dart AI to help augment the best and brightest in the field based on what we're hearing from them. And that's not necessarily me, although I do my best, of course. But yeah, and I mean, I think that makes Dart AI super powerful. I think being motivated, learning from these experts in the field and like trying to incorporate their behavior and their best practices and the way they think about things into a model, or into an agent, is probably the best way. I bet that's going to be the best way to build agents, at least for the near term. Trying to incorporate the best possible practices and stuff. As far as on my end, yeah, I mean, I am a productivity nerd for sure, self-identified. I try to tamp that down sometimes because I also want to get stuff done, and I've seen too many people fall into the the hyper configuration rabbit hole and spend too much time on workflows and on process and on building a perfect Notion page, Notion template. And so on a personal note, I guess I always am balancing those factors, but I do love configuring an awesome workflow that saves time. I have all sorts of crazy keyboard shortcuts and crazy, aliases in the terminal. And I have these daily Dart templates that have a bunch of the to-dos that I have every day. We have all sorts of little keyboard shortcuts and fancy, time-saving measures in the product. And then as we build out more and more, it's just going to be more and more configurability and more ability to represent the perfect workflow for your team, not just the one that we have now.
There's always the importance of the meta, just get it done type of thing, which I know I've been prey to. My gosh, of configuring something because it's not quite just perfect. I think it's not just in the productivity space. I think there's like an engineering thing in general where you ask a veteran engineer to code something simple up, and it'll not be simple, like there'll be all kinds of considerations that, oh, but what if you think about this thing? Or it's like, then the testing suite and all that stuff. I know I have to tame my urge to over-engineer.
Right.
But there's still
There's probably one of those memes with the bell curve, and on one end is like, just do it. And in the middle is like, go crazy, hyper optimizing a process for it. And then on the far end, the Jedi Master is also just doing it.
Yeah, exactly. But there's the fun project of building a tool, AI powered, it will have to be, that decomposes tasks into smaller things and is able to know when to keep digging deeper versus, now I have all the information and context I need to execute this task. And that there's an interface where, like you can bubble up the information, not to necessarily to a human reviewer, but to an AI reviewer who can then say, this is good enough, can run competitions, I think that's an exciting point of like, spawn 3 instances of the marketer and hear the best one. And then you sort of like create a little feedback loop where you take the good ones and you promote the good ones. And I think that the geek in me is like intellectually fascinated by that project, like there's, and not only because I think it's really cool to figure something that works that out, but also because it means that at the end of the day, and to steal a phrase from you last time, is you want to give people, you operate Dart at the highest possible level, and you sort of like everything else gets leveraged by technology, like everything else will be reasoned out, everything will get thought through, everything will get tested, everything will get validated, everything will get analyzed. And so let's talk a little bit about that vision of the future and how you blend the fact that we're not there yet, in the sense that the world isn't quite there yet, but we're building toward it, and the very tactical, bug fixes and stuff of the day-to-day. How do you blend, the motivating vision with the weekly sprint?
Totally. The day-to-day needs. Keeping the an old friend I used to work with always used to say, running the business, right? There was a big category of work. Every sprint, 40% of our work was just running the business. And then we could dedicate the rest to, new projects and stuff. Really interesting question. Just on the last point, one thing that occurred to me as well is also that with the leverage that we get with LLMs is so much greater than I think we get with a lot of, let's say, traditional automation or some of the basic improvements that you might make to a process or something, that it becomes a little bit more worth it to spend more time optimizing your process or optimizing your workflow. if something is, there's a whole equation probably with like, okay, if I invest 2 hours now and that saves me 5 minutes, but it's that 5 minutes is once a week for 3 members of my team, and so on and so on. You can do the math and say, okay, it's worth it. But for an LLM, it's, if I invest a week in getting a great team of agents running and coordinated and working well together, then suddenly in 5 years, when there are great agents for a lot of different parts of the, let's say, the software development world, I invest a week in setting that up, and then I can do years worth of roadmap in minutes. I don't know, right? Like, there's a crazy leverage calculation there that is just actually different than what leverage might have been like in the past. And so we might need to rethink our calculations about how much optimization is worth it. I know I at least might be hesitant to like spend a whole week configuring agents or whatever, but when you think about it in terms of, okay, this might literally save me years, like instantly, like it's kind of sexier than like a GitHub integration that changes your statuses or whatever, which we also do, but is like saves 1 click. It saves 10 clicks a week, right? So anyway, back to the topic of now, right? Like, how does the world look and work now? Yeah, I think it's cool. It's easier than you might expect to build something that works well for humans and AI, mostly because we're trying to meet humans where they are. Right now, Dart it's a human interface to what is becoming both a human and AI agent world, but it's the human interface side of that. So we have an interface that would be familiar to anyone that is working on with a more traditional project management tool. And there are some things that are a little bit different about it, but a lot of it would be very familiar. And you can just assign in a dropdown. There's a dropdown that says, who do I want to work on this, right? And in Dart, we've got the 10 members of our team, and then we've got a Dart AI button there. And sometimes Dart AI will comment back and be like, I actually can't build an airplane for you right now. Like, sorry, try assigning me a different task. But it'll sometimes say, oh yeah, sure, I can work on that. I know how to write a blog post, do the change log, et cetera, reassign these tasks, that kind of thing. And then it'll get it done, right? And so there's a little bit, we're taking an approach of kind of meeting humans where they are so that humans can be led comfortably into the future. And that means, I guess at the end of the day, what that means is that some of the interface challenges that we might be facing if we were trying to fully reinvent the PM space for a future 10 or 20 years from now, it might be harder. It's a little harder to picture that reality where AI does all the work and stuff. So I guess, very long story short, a lot of those bug fixes that we do help both. They both help the day-to-day usage of the product for working with the rest of your team, and they also help the agents and using Dart as an agentic framework.
Yeah, and I think you're touching on another interesting point. That is, I think we talked a little bit. I mentioned a little bit how HCI is going to change, but I think it's going to mean less HCI. I mean, it literally is going to be way more. The next generation, SaaS plus, whatever comes after software as a service, it'll just be a service business. It'll be like the interface will be an email, or the interface will be a text message, or it'll be there might be some kind of in-app visualizations for domain-specific things that are like there and you can't go around them. But I think for most things, the wizardry will fade to the background, and it will be these systems that are reasoning behind your back, that are calling APIs, that are synthesizing information, they're packaging it, testing it, reviewing it, and then presenting it to you in a surface that you're already, that a surface that you already have. So they're not competing on building a different service, surface. So I think that is huge. And then I think I'm a huge fan of how you're thinking about building that data structure that these agents use to understand where they're going in their own roadmaps of their own little things that they're doing, right? So there's kind of a really cool reasoning, accelerating AI type of component there too, where you could give domain-specific agents now all of a sudden the power of organization. And I think that's incredibly exciting.
Totally.
What are some of the most exciting non-business critical or non-business related at all AI futures that you're excited about?
Whew. Wow.
Bit of a
So many.
tangent. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Well, I think I am a very discursive learner. So I don't know if that's a real type of learner or if I just made that up, but I learn a lot by talking things through with people. And if I'm being honest, I learn a lot by like debating and arguing with people and playing devil's advocate and creating like arguments and stuff. And honestly, that's not, as I've gotten older, I've found that that's not the way that a lot of other people want to interact in life. And so some people do, but I do less like arguing and debating than I used to, mostly because I just want to get along with the people around me and stuff more than I want to learn, I suppose, at least more than I want to learn through that method. And so one thing I've already been using ChatGPT for a lot is just debating, poking holes in arguments, trying to understand the limits of like concepts, let's say a legal concept or like, or just understanding things about the world, and asking people politics or history or those sorts of things. And I think that if I could truly have a conversation with someone, I don't need to be able to see them, but if GPT-4o is truly just like having a phone call with GPT-4 and I can debate it and say, and ask questions and ask follow-ups and create devil's advocate arguments and stuff, I think that will be a really big unlock for me in terms of learning about the world in general. I don't play a lot of video games anymore, but startup time takes a lot of time. But I think that building out real worlds with almost real-ish seeming people where you actually have an objective rather than walking up to an NPC and having to try to navigate the conversation tree to like get the outcome that you want. Trying to actually practice your charisma and be like actually convincing to like get to someone to actually do the thing that you want. And if you fail, you fail, and then you have to do something else, try again, get more practice. I think that is going to be super cool and super fun for me. And I also think it can just help people learn how to interact with humans and stuff too, which is kind of cool. I don't know. Those are some things that spring to mind.
Yeah, no, I love those. I mean, the education. I don't know why this isn't a bigger thing, but I think the entirety of the positivity of AI could be centered around the education aspect. And oh my gosh, I mean, like we're talking about stuff that we couldn't conceive of 3 years ago, and like in terms of personalization, in terms of. There's also the fact that, for example, these models know the most famous arguments against, like, say, in a philosophy setting, like, give me the refute dualism or something like that.
Right.
And it'll try, and it'll cite stuff, and then you can have this discussion with it about the concept. I grew up in an environment where, always expressing, but wait a minute, this is what I think is the truth, and somebody saying, no, this is the truth, and then be like a negotiation around what the truth really was.
Yes.
And it's the kind of conversation I like to have. I don't like it when it gets too feisty, but and it gets into this complicated area for foundation model builders or anybody who's building these apps, is that at some point you're going to make decisions about the personality of this thing, the things that it's willing to give ground on, the things that it's around the creator's bias versus the consumer's bias. And I think that's also a really interesting future that we're going to have to navigate, between the creator of the LLM's views about how the world works, and some of it may be informed, but it's probably not going to be as informed as the training data itself. The training data should bear out empirically within the data some of the patterns that we can now discard. But it's still and there's another layer too, which is the difference between personalization and universality, right? We want to be able to talk to these things a lot, but not if they create a warped perception of reality that I exist in my own bubble.
Right. And accidentally radicalize me
to my own thing. I get radicalized on the, My Little Pony or something. And
it's like the purest form of an echo chamber. You're not just in it with a bunch of other people who think the same thing you are. You're literally in it with, you're trapped in a prison of your own creation and your own thoughts that is literally just echoing back at you.
And it is God. So you think that God is agreeing with you.
Right.
And so I think that's one concept. But also when you get to the project of universality, you're upsetting somebody for sure. Right.
Sure. I mean, I don't want to sound too free markety, but one answer, at least in the short term, potentially, to the problem of developer bias, shall we say, or accidentally encoding that stuff in an agent or in a foundational model even or whatever, is that will, as long as there's good competition, the ones that actually are best for the consumer will rise to the top. And I think it is different with AI agents. They're more powerful, they're more important and stuff in some ways, but I mean, I make hundreds of mini decisions every day as even as an IC, but certainly as an engineering leader, I make hundreds of mini product decisions, every day. And that's just straight up reflecting my bias and stuff. And so much of Dart right now is just going to be shaped around the people that have made it and the product leadership that has happened to be here and the design leadership. Yeah, I mean, an AI agent or a god or whatever is going to be more important than the color choice and whatnot. But products, I guess my point is just that even now and for the past, and as long as products have existed, to a certain extent, products have been a reflection of the creator and not just the consumer.
There's a final question from me that is around, and I think this is sort of very much in sort of aligned with the idea of Dart. Dart is empowering organizations and augmenting organizations with AI. How does Dart, or maybe you specifically or your team, use AI to augment your own workflow?
Sure. Yeah, we do it a lot. We use GitHub Copilot, and we use that in VS Code, and everybody on the team, all the engineers, use it. Everyone has ChatGPT subscriptions as well. A lot of time people just go over there and Google stuff. It's generally a better, in my opinion at least, it's a little bit faster. Just in the past 6 months, the accuracy and fidelity and speed has generally surpassed Stack Overflow as like the first place to go for a basic coding question. On the marketing side, we're Dart is a marketing first go-to-market motion. We don't really do much sales. We do a lot of marketing to get people to come to us, and that means a lot of copy and a lot of content and a lot of good stuff. We do a lot of that by hand as well, and the important parts and the important points we hit by hand, but some of the reiterating the message and the hammering points home and stuff, we generate as a first pass with AI as well. So that can be really helpful in terms of, I don't want to like, we're not spamming stuff. I like to think of it as like we're reiterating the message, or we're sometimes even finding new or better ways to communicate a message too, right? I mean, if you brainstorm a bunch of good ways to communicate a message and a bunch of ways to get something across to someone, I mean, that's just good communication, honestly. So we do, I mean, I did that yesterday, where I was thinking about, okay, what are some ways we can communicate this narrative about Dart? And ChatGPT is a great partner for that. What else? There are lots of little tools. We're kind of, I don't have any specific tools that I would name by name right now that, but I mean, probably 10 different like small AI tools that are helping things, and a lot of products, right? I mean, we use, when we're checking out Notion, we use the Notion search for sure, the AI search. I think Slack's got some AI features now. We're not using those because that's like a huge paid tier increase. But yeah, there's so many cool things now, I guess.
It's exciting, man. And they keep popping up by the day. And I'm very excited to hear about people who, practitioners, people who are actually using it and actually comparing, I guess, the baseline. I think one of the faults of the space is that there is a lot of buzz and there is a lot of hype, and that like you can ship something very quickly that's very low quality because it's never been easier to ship anything before.
Right.
And but like, then again, tools that are tried and true and like that produce reliable output and you can use in production setting. I'm really curious, like in general, to hear what people's experiences have been. Zack, this was great, man. I really appreciate your time. I feel like we have like about 10,000 hours of stuff we didn't talk about.
So many extra branches we could visit some other time, I'm sure.
Yes, and I very much look forward to it, my friend. I'll let you know when the episode is out.
There you go. Thanks, Cristian. Great talking with you.
You too. Bye.